On a humid afternoon in August 2023, I watched a truck pull up beside my mailbox and remove the one thing that had quietly protected our street for years. There was no announcement, no warning, no conversation with the people who lived there. Just two men in orange safety vests, a flatbed truck with flashing yellow lights, and a heavy chain dragging across the pavement like they had every right to tear apart something that belonged to all of us. I was standing in my front yard with a pair of garden shears in my hand, trimming the old crepe myrtle near my driveway, when I heard that awful scraping sound. At first, I thought maybe the county was doing road work. Maybe there was some repair I didn't know about. But then I looked up and saw them lifting one of the yellow speed bumps off the road piece by piece, and something about it immediately felt wrong. My name is Daniel Harper, and at the time, I lived in a small brick house on the edge of a neighborhood called Willow Creek Estates, right outside the HOA boundary. That detail mattered, because technically I wasn't part of their community. I didn't attend their meetings. I didn't vote on their rules. And I didn't have any say in what their board decided behind closed doors. But the road they controlled, Cedar Ridge Lane, ran right alongside my property. And whether my name was on their paperwork or not, that road was part of my everyday life. It was where neighbors walked their dogs in the evening, where kids rode bicycles after school, and where parents felt comfortable letting their children play outside because drivers knew they had to slow down. Those speed bumps were beautiful. Nobody looked at them and thought, what a wonderful piece of road design. They were just strips of yellow asphalt that did one simple job. They reminded people to take their foot off the gas. And honestly, that was enough. For years, everyone accepted them because everyone understood why they were there. So when I walked toward those workers and asked, "Are you guys taking all of them out?" I expected a normal explanation. Maybe a repair schedule. Maybe a county project. Something reasonable. Instead, one of the workers looked at me, wiped the sweat from his forehead, and said, "Just following orders. The HOA board approved it. They said they needed emergency access." Then he turned around and went back to work. No details, no paperwork, no "have a good day." Just that sentence hanging in the air while another piece of the speed bump disappeared. I stood there watching and remember thinking, emergency access to what? Because nothing about the situation looked like an emergency. There were no ambulances, no blocked roads, no disaster, just two workers quietly removing the only thing slowing traffic down. At first, I tried to give everyone the benefit of the doubt. I wasn't the kind of person who assumed the worst about people. I spent most of my life fixing cars, repairing equipment, and solving problems. My first instinct was always to figure out what was broken before blaming someone. Maybe there was a reason. Maybe there was information I didn't have. Maybe the HOA knew something the rest of us didn't. But then the days passed, and every speed bump on Cedar Ridge Lane was gone, and the change was immediate. Before, the street had a rhythm. Cars would slow down. Tires would roll over the bumps. Drivers would naturally become more careful because the road demanded it. After they were removed, that rhythm disappeared. Engines started revving louder. Vehicles moved faster. The street felt different, like someone had turned a quiet neighborhood road into a shortcut overnight. And then the trucks arrived. At first, it was just a few pickup trucks. Nothing too unusual. But within weeks, the traffic started changing. Large white work trucks began appearing. Concrete mixers rolled through. Dump trucks carrying dirt and gravel passed by our houses. The sound of construction replaced the normal sounds of the neighborhood. Instead of kids laughing and people talking on porches, we heard diesel engines and heavy equipment moving through the street. The smell of fuel hung in the air during the afternoons. It felt like we were living next to a construction zone, except nobody had ever told us one was coming. I remember standing outside one evening watching another line of trucks pass my house and thinking about how strange the whole thing was. A road that was supposed to serve the residents was suddenly serving someone else. The question wasn't just why the speed bumps were removed anymore. The question was, who needed them gone? Because someone had made a decision. Someone had benefited from that decision, and the rest of us were left dealing with the consequences. I just didn't know yet how far this was going to go. I didn't know that those missing speed bumps were only the beginning. I didn't know that within a few weeks, a simple neighborhood road issue would turn into a fight over trust, safety, and whether ordinary people still had a voice in their own community. A few weeks after those speed bumps disappeared, I started noticing something that bothered me more than the noise, more than the trucks, even more than the fact that nobody had explained anything. It was the way everyone was slowly adjusting to it. That's something I've learned about neighborhoods. People are patient, sometimes too patient. We tell ourselves things will fix themselves. We assume someone with more authority is paying attention. We think, surely somebody already asked about this. But sometimes everybody is waiting for somebody else to speak first, and that's exactly how problems get bigger. I remember sitting on my porch one evening, watching another line of construction trucks roll past my house, and thinking about how strange it was that a place designed for families had somehow become a shortcut for a project nobody had even mentioned to us. It felt like we had become guests on our own street. The turning point came on a Thursday afternoon around 4 p.m. I was in my garage organizing some old tools when I heard a sound that made me stop what I was doing. It was the deep growl of a heavy truck engine coming way too fast down Cedar Ridge Lane. I stepped outside and saw a black Ford F-250 coming around the curve near the mailboxes. That curve had always been a slow point because of the speed bump that used to sit there. Drivers naturally eased off the gas. They looked ahead. They paid attention, but now there was nothing forcing them to slow down. And at that exact moment, a little boy named Noah Bennett was riding his red bicycle across the street. I still remember the way everything seemed to move in slow motion. The truck was coming closer. Noah was halfway across. The driver didn't see him until the last second. Then suddenly, the peaceful afternoon exploded with the sound of tires screaming against pavement. The truck slammed on the brakes. Smoke came from the tires. The vehicle stopped just a few feet away from that little boy. I'm not exaggerating when I say everyone froze. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my chest. Neighbors came running out of their homes. A woman across the street dropped the bag she was carrying. Someone yelled, "Is he okay?" The driver opened his door and jumped out, and the look on his face said everything. He wasn't angry. He wasn't defensive. He looked terrified because he knew exactly how close he had come to changing a family's life forever. Noah stood there holding his bicycle handles, completely silent. He was okay, but you could see the fear on his face. And honestly, that was the moment something changed for all of us. Because before that day, the missing speed bumps were an inconvenience. After that day, they were a warning sign. That night, my neighbor Sarah Whitmore knocked on my door. Sarah was one of those people who always seemed to know what was happening around town, not because she was trying to be involved in everyone's business, but because she actually paid attention. While most people deleted those long county emails without opening them, Sarah read them. She followed planning notices. She checked public records. She had a habit of asking questions before problems became disasters. She stood on my porch holding her laptop and said, "Daniel, I think I found out why they removed the speed bumps." I invited her inside, and she showed me a county notice dated July 14th. It was an announcement for a new housing development being planned behind the wooded area past Willow Creek Estates. The project was called Pine Valley Crossing, and it was a massive development that needed construction access while their main entrance road was being built. Suddenly, all the pieces started fitting together. The trucks, the timing, the speed bumps disappearing right before construction started. But I still wanted proof. I didn't want rumors. I didn't want assumptions. I wanted facts. So the next morning, I drove down to the county records office and started digging. I spent 2 full days going through documents, permits, and agreements. It wasn't glamorous. Nobody makes a movie about someone sitting under fluorescent lights reading legal paperwork for hours. But sometimes the most important battles are fought in the most boring places. And eventually, I found what I was looking for. Hidden inside the public records was a temporary access agreement between Willow Creek Estates HOA and the developer behind Pine Valley Crossing. The agreement allowed construction vehicles to use Cedar Ridge Lane as a shortcut until their own road was completed, but the part that made my stomach drop was the signature at the bottom, Richard Collins. The HOA president had approved it, not the homeowners, not through a community vote, not after a public meeting. One person had made a decision that affected hundreds of people. I remember staring at that document and feeling something deeper than anger. It was disappointment. Because I understood wanting progress. I understood wanting new development and better opportunities for the area. But there was a right way to do things. You talk to people. You explain the plan. You let them have a voice. You don't quietly remove safety measures and hope nobody notices. When I brought the documents to the next HOA meeting, the atmosphere was completely different from any meeting I had ever attended. The room was packed. People were standing along the walls. Homeowners, who usually never said a word, were there holding copies of the agreement. Richard Collins walked in looking calm, almost too calm, like he expected everyone to eventually accept his explanation. He stepped up and said, "I think everyone needs to understand that this was done for the benefit of the community. It was a temporary solution." I stood up and looked at him and said, "A temporary solution for who?" Because the people living next to that road were asked if we wanted to become a construction route. The room went quiet. Richard tried to explain that the developer had promised repairs and that the access would only last for a few months. But nobody was focused on the repairs anymore. The real issue was trust. A mother sitting near the front stood up and said, "You removed the only thing slowing those trucks down, and you didn't tell anyone until after it was already done." Nobody had an answer for that. And that was when I realized this wasn't going to be solved by another HOA discussion. We had already asked questions. We had already waited. Now we needed people outside our neighborhood to understand what happened. So I contacted a local reporter and gave them everything we had: the agreement, the timeline, and the doorbell camera footage showing how close Noah came to being hit. I knew once that story went public, everything would change. Because some people can ignore a complaint from a neighbor. They can dismiss a question at a meeting, but they have a much harder time ignoring the truth when everyone else can see it. And within days, Cedar Ridge Lane was no longer just a neighborhood street. It became the center of a fight over who gets heard, who gets protected, and what happens when people in power forget that they are supposed to serve the people who trusted them. After the news story aired, something changed in the neighborhood that I didn't expect. For weeks, people had been walking around angry, frustrated, and honestly a little embarrassed that we had allowed something like this to happen right under our noses. But after everything came out, people started talking to each other again. Not the polite kind of conversations you have when you pass someone checking their mailbox, but real conversations. The kind where neighbors stand in driveways for 30 minutes because they finally realize they've all been thinking the same thing. We started hearing stories from other homeowners who had concerns about the HOA for years, but never felt like speaking up would actually matter. One person said they had questioned a landscaping decision and was told, "That's just how things work here." Another said they stopped attending meetings because every discussion felt like a decision had already been made before anyone walks through the door. And that was the part that bothered me the most. It wasn't just about one road, one agreement, or one group of trucks. It was about how easy it becomes for people to stop paying attention when they assume someone else is watching. I think a lot of communities are like that. Everyone is busy. Everyone has work, family, bills, and 100 other things pulling at them. You tell yourself, someone will ask the right questions. Someone will read the paperwork. Someone will notice if something doesn't seem right. But sometimes nobody does. Sometimes everyone is waiting for someone else to care first. And that's exactly how small decisions become big problems. A few weeks after the speed bumps were restored, I ran into Richard Collins at a local hardware store. It was one of those awkward moments where you see someone you know you have unfinished business with, but neither person knows exactly how to start the conversation. I was picking up some supplies for a backyard project when I saw him standing near the paint aisle. For a second, I thought about just walking away. After everything that happened, I wasn't looking for another argument, I wasn't interested in winning some personal battle. But then he looked over and said, "Daniel." I nodded. "Richard." He looked different than he did at the HOA meeting. Less confident. Less like the person who had walked into that room believing he could control the outcome. He stood there quietly for a moment and finally said, "You know, I never thought it would turn into all of this." I looked at him and said, "Neither did I." But that's usually what happens when people make decisions for everyone else without telling them. He didn't respond right away. He just looked down at the floor, and for the first time, I wondered if he truly understood what had gone wrong. Maybe he had convinced himself that removing the speed bumps was just a temporary inconvenience. Maybe he thought people would complain for a week and then move on. Maybe he thought the bigger project mattered more than a few frustrated neighbors. But what he underestimated was that people weren't fighting against construction. They weren't fighting against change. They were fighting against being ignored. That's a feeling almost everyone understands. Nobody likes waking up one day and realizing something important was decided without them having a say. Whether it's your home, your neighborhood, your workplace, or your community, people want to feel like they matter. And when they don't, even the smallest issue can become a breaking point. Months later, Cedar Ridge Lane went back to being the quiet street it had always been. Kids rode bikes again. People walked their dogs in the evening. The sound of delivery trucks and construction equipment slowly disappeared. The new development eventually found another access route, and life moved on. But I noticed something interesting after all of it. People started showing up. They attended meetings. They read notices. They asked questions. They stopped assuming someone else was handling everything. And honestly, that was probably the biggest victory of the whole situation. The speed bumps were replaced. But the bigger thing that came back was involvement. Because a community isn't built by houses, fences, or perfectly maintained lawns, it's built by people who are willing to care when something feels wrong. I still keep the old photo I took that day in August when the workers first removed those speed bumps. It's nothing special, just a picture of a truck, some pavement, and a couple of workers doing their job. But every time I look at it, I remember how close we came to accepting something dangerous simply because nobody wanted to make a fuss. And maybe that's the lesson I took away from everything. Sometimes the biggest problems don't arrive loudly. They show up quietly. They come in the form of a signed document nobody reads, a meeting nobody attends, or a decision nobody questions. And by the time people finally notice, the damage is already done. But the good news is, it only takes a few people willing to speak up to change the direction of an entire community. So now I'm curious what you think. If you lived on Cedar Ridge Lane, would you have challenged the HOA immediately? Or would you have waited to see if the construction traffic became a real problem? Do you think the HOA president was trying to help the community, or did he abuse the trust people gave him? And where do you think the line should be between making decisions quickly and making sure everyone affected gets a voice? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. Because these situations are never as simple as they look from the outside, sometimes there are good intentions behind bad decisions. And sometimes people only realize they went too far when the people around them finally stopped staying quiet. If this story made you think about your own neighborhood, share it with someone who believes every community depends on ordinary people paying attention. Because sometimes, all it takes is one person asking, "Wait, why are we doing this?" for everyone else to finally start listening.